Hi, friends. Welcome to our weekly Data Talk, a show where we talk with data science leaders from around the world. Today, we're talking to Dr. Michael Bliemel. He's the Dean, Faculty of Business and Information Technology at Ontario Tech University. Dr. Michael Bliemel, thank you so much for being our guest in Data Talk today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Can you kind of share your academic journey?
So I started out as an engineer in the 1990s. And like many of my colleagues, we were intrigued by the internet and what might come from that. And so I pursued a master's and then a PhD in information systems after that. With an interest around what kind of technologies might come in the digital space and how they can be used to improve businesses. And a variety of other things. So I actually started out looking at solutions in healthcare. So it's into e-health many years ago, and found that a lot of the same issues, or you just see them over and over and over again, around emerging technologies and the adoption of new technologies and what the challenges are to the success or the failure of that in the organization. So then more recently, I have been, I was working at Dalhousie University in Halifax for many years. And as a professor there, did a lot to become connected with the industry in the space of enterprise systems and then analytics. We had the good fortune of a company called IBM setting up a global service center in our city, and they were looking to hire many of our students from programs that didn't exist yet.
Oh, fascinating.
So I quickly reskilled myself and a colleague of mine to learn more about what the state of the art was in analytics, and had a lot of fun learning new things and applying technologies and implementing those in the classroom. And after a couple of years of doing that and IBM hiring a whole bunch of our graduates, I got the call to come to a university where it was a little bit of a different faculty than not your normal business school, but faculty of business and information technology all rolled into one faculty. And that was just a little hard for me to resist, that being right up my alley. And so I moved all the way back to Ontario.
Tell me about trying to develop a program to help train students for the future for jobs that don't exist yet.
So, I'm doing that again now, but I'll tell you about what we did back then. We were working with SAP at the time and finding that they had a lot of technology and they had a lot of customers that were struggling with the same thing that we were. And so we actively connected with the customers and talked to them about, what are the tools that you guys are actually using, and what are the vendors telling you that you should be using, and where's the disconnect? What's your roadmap? And so what we would do then is we would look to create curriculum and courses that would help get the students more data literate and teach them how to work with messy data that was usually open source data that was filled with errors or just not very well formatted, or they didn't have a clear data dictionary. And we taught our students how to work with that, how to combine different data sets from completely different organizations, and to come up with some good insights. So we got into something called the Watson Analytics Global Contest, and basically it was a contest that colleagues of ours from Deakin University in Australia helped start, where students were asked to put together challenges or solutions to environmental challenges using open data. And our students did quite well the first time around, and then the second time around we did even better. And we were really thrilled to really connect with a lot of the world leading other universities in the space of data analytics, and What we found through that process is when you're working with these messy data sets and trying to merge different data sets together. So I'll give you an example. One of our student groups was working on looking at the environmental impact in the United States of beef. And I think it was about 2 years ago, there was a study that came out that looked at what are the CO2 emissions and the water usages of beef in comparison to chicken, for example. And so our students were able to look at what the global consumption was, as well as focused on the United States, and then look at trying to calculate out what the actual impact was in terms of how many days of Niagara Falls water would be saved if Americans ate 10% less beef.
Oh, wow.
And putting that in a context, that's not swimming pools, that's Niagara Falls in a couple
right.
of there's that's a lot of people, and just comparing, how far could you drive a Toyota if you switched one meal from chicken to beef, or from beef to chicken?
Really?
And trying to put those CO2 calculations into context. And if you can drive 50 miles in a car and spend the same amount of greenhouse gas than just one food choice, that's quite impactful. And so in order to get the students to that point, though, they had to learn a whole bunch of data management skills. And they had to learn the curiosity on how do you try to solve some of the problems of incompatible data sets. So sometimes you'll have things with a time that is a weekly data series. Another data series might be monthly. Sometimes some things might be organized by region at one level or the other. And then how to kind of work around and fix those things in the data set in order to merge data sets was something that we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to teach the students how to do. Once we did that, they were empowered to come up with new ways of looking at the world and combining data that nobody had previously combined before. And that was really impressive. And after that, students knew they were, probably some of the first students that were combining these different things and looking at these hypotheses. And they weren't looking at, t-tests and regression analyses and that kind of statistics. They were more looking at the visual and looking at what insights would come out of it. And we had a whole range of interesting ones. I think one of the most fun one was we had a geospatial data set where we were looking at combining different maps and data sources. One was shark attacks and tornadoes.
Oh.
Okay. And if you look at that, they're actually correlated. And but you have to look a little bit deeper as well. It's Florida is where sharks are and shark attacks. But if you then get into looking at other data sources like where habitats are and where people live, and then you see, that's the intersection of where you get shark attacks. And then that all of a sudden makes sense for people.
I think it's wonderful that you have been just like helping develop courses to help prepare our next generation of data science leaders or people that are working in business, getting them prepared to work with these large data sets, to think creatively, to be asking really smart questions. Can you talk a little bit about or how you are beginning to incorporate AI into curriculum?
A lot of the job of teaching has dull and tedious repetitive parts to it called grading. And but that's some of the more valuable learning opportunities or teaching opportunities because you can give good feedback to students when you're grading. However, you have to repeat that for every single semester, every single course. And so that's where this opportunity has kind of emerged for the textbook publishing industry. And in order to help with some of that work, and they've provided some resources for quizzes, for example, or assignments where students get auto-graded. And the auto grading is based off of their prior data set of people that had completed it, what kind of feedback the instructors gave, and then giving basically some helpful comments and return after the student submits their work. Specifically here, we've started to explore some of that with some of our more advanced courses. So I don't know if you've, I'm not sure if you've had experience with case studies and having to write, in strategy courses, you'd have to respond to a certain case, in written form. Here's the decision that I would do. This is my summary of what it is. So there's basically every student would have a text document that is in response to the question. And if you have a large enough sample of these text documents and the corresponding grading of those, then what you can start to do is you can use natural language processing to build up basically a predictive library that can tell you that this is an A kind of answer, this is a B kind of answer, C kind of answer, and here are a couple paragraphs on where they could have been better and some specific feedback. So that's technology that we're exploring, but we haven't gotten to work yet. But that's something that's not too far off.
That's super, super cool to be able to have an AI to help to evaluate papers and answers like that, because that is very time-consuming work
and repetitive. It's very repetitive, and if you have that automated, then you can also try to reduce some of if you have multiple TAs, for example, marking a large class, then you might get some differences in between how one TA would grade things and how others would. So you get consistency right across the course, which would be beneficial for the whole class.
What sorts of challenges do you think students might have with this new model of having an AI grade their papers?
I foresee there could be a couple of them. One is there are examples of some commercial companies that are trying to do this, and they're using the technology that was used for plagiarism detection, and then building on the data set, the big database of how many assignments were submitted to the plagiarism detection software. And so in some jurisdictions in Canada, at least, there are privacy issues with using that company's software. And it's actually been banned in a couple of provinces, and they have to use basically other more locally used technologies. So the privacy is definitely a concern. You imagine your work is being added to a massive repository of work. Your name may not be attached to it,
right.
But it's still your intellectual property because you're the one who created it. And if a university makes you submit it through there, then you have to have the ability to also withdraw your consent for that to be added to the database, especially if it's a for-profit company that's eventually going to be using that to train their automatic grading. So there's definitely some privacy and legal issues that are arising already, and that could continue to make it difficult to innovate in some spaces. One of the other ones that I foresee arising is if, or I would say when, the automatic grading technologies become more available, there will be less work to do those dull and repetitive tasks. And of course, there will be people worried about their jobs going away. As teaching assistants, a lot of students make a little bit of money as teaching assistants. But I see that a little bit differently. I see that as an opportunity, not for that work to go away, but for the work to change. So you probably get more value of the limited resources that schools have to spend on teaching assistants, to have them actually assisting the teacher or or tutoring students rather than sitting in a small room somewhere and marking papers.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the benefits down the road, but it couldn't be foreseen as, some might see that there might be a challenge that somebody's work of just doing menial grading might go away. But I don't see that as the issue that's going to be coming up. So apart from the grading, there are lots of other applications for machine learning and in education. So one is a project I was working on with my PhD student. And what we were doing is we were trying to address the problem of an online class or a MOOC, where the success rates are very, very low because people tend to get disengaged.
Mm.
And what we did is we were trying to find a way to measure engagement and how to measure mind wandering. And what we did is, so it was a collaborative project with the neurosciences, business, and computer science department.
Wow.
And what we did is we basically gave various e-learning tasks to research subjects. We had an ActiCap EEG system hooked up to so it's basically
Really?
it had electrodes.
Wow.
And we had many different parts of the brain. We were measuring the brain waves, and then we were using machine learning to then build a predictive model based off of the brain waves to see where somebody's mind was wandering, and able to detect that. And so that was kind of the scientific approach to it. But where that technology can eventually lead is to start to build systems where you don't need a big gel cap with electrodes, but you can use some of the more commercial products. There are EEG systems you can buy at your local Best Buy for $200, and so we started with that technology. And the idea is you could strap that on while you're watching your MOOC, and if your mind starts to wander, well then the course could do something either to get your attention again or to speed it up or to do some kind of neuroadaptive response to your disengagement with the material. And so that's something a good professor can do already, but they can't do that in an online learning environment. It's very difficult to do. And so there's a lot of very interesting opportunities coming with machine learning and learning in general that we can see that will probably hit the industry in the next decade or two.
Wow. How do you see teaching changing? I was watching a documentary, I think this was in China, where they were taking some of the best teachers, the best professors at certain schools, and bringing like their recorded lectures into some of the schools where maybe the best teachers weren't at, to help kind of improve learning. And I'm kind of curious about your view of like how teaching might change, evolve with AI and being able to take like the best professors at a college and take that course and kind of duplicate it in some way.
Well, we see some of that already a lot. A lot of good professors will they'll use a YouTube video of some influential person speaking about an issue, and they'll use that in the classroom, to bring some outside context. It's an easy technology to use, makes the students a little bit more engaged. It's not a dry PowerPoint slide or anything like that. But the art of teaching is then what do you do after you show the video? So say you have you get a Bill Gates to talk about the early days of computing, and then after that you can relate that with the students. You can talk about, so we're now at the early days of AI. How do you see parallels between the early days of computing and the early days of AI. And then you can start driving a discussion that way. So you can, they're using kind of a pre-recorded teaching lecture, that's one thing you can do, but that doesn't address the dialogue and the critical thought that has to happen afterwards. Otherwise, you're just really showing a movie. And
right.
Yeah, we've all learned great things from Hollywood.
Right.
But I think the deeper learning comes from the debates that happen afterwards, and then looking at different viewpoints and that sort of thing.
Do you see having individual kind of AI teachers kind of helping the student along, helping engage with questions?
Yeah, so there are already a couple projects that I've seen. So there's out of MIT, a spin-off startup that's exploring using AI to manage group discussions and to basically do just that. Basically, you have a large group video and that sort of thing, and then you break out into groups. And instead of having an instructor supervising each of the groups and guiding things, and you can use an AI to do that. And it will also give feedback to the participants and let them know, here's how you're doing in real time. Now that, wow, I think it's an interesting idea of, can you imagine going back to school and seeing, on your smartwatch what your grade is at any moment?
Real-time feedback.
Your real-time grade, you know how you're doing, you can see the trend, and then you can answer, put your hand up, ask a question, you see your grade go up. That is the futuristic, but it's not that far off. I'm sure somebody's already thinking of an app for that.
Are teachers concerned about their role in the future? Because as AI gets better and potentially an AI could teach a course?
I honestly don't think it's going to be that big a concern. The reality is that the world's a complex place. And if you use AI to teach something, you can't really teach really complex subjects with it. Ideally, it's there to do something that's repeatable and something like math or geometry, chemistry, and surely at the lower level courses, the universities for years have been filling lecture halls with 200-300 students for those kinds of classes.
Mm-hmm.
By using AI, it might be a little bit more interactive and interesting for 200 people who may not be in a physical lecture hall to do that. But the upper level courses are always going to have a deeper level of learning, of applying the knowledge and of creating new knowledge. So I'll come back to the example of the analytics. We can teach you how to bar chart, but when you want to go deeper and learn, how to explain what's in that chart, and then how to combine some other data, and then how to maybe make a different kind of chart to explain it even better, that's something that would have to be learned by doing, and it wouldn't be as easily replicated by an AI. Not yet, at least.
I was reading an article, and you said you're talking about the textbook industry, and you said something about the traditional textbook business model is pretty much dead. And I was wondering if you can kind of talk a little bit about that.
2 decades ago or so, when I was an undergraduate student, you had to go to the bookstore and buy a couple inches worth of books each semester, and that was pretty much a requirement. What you did though is you brought those books at the end of the semester back to the bookstore and to get your basically sell them used again.
That's right.
Once there are digital copies of these things, made it a lot more difficult for bookstores to be making money from books.
Mm-hmm.
The publishing industry reacted also when when basically once you could have PowerPoint slides and quizzes and more things added on, they spent more and more on the additional resources than the actual textbooks. And as time went on, students spent less time reading the books. They spend more time interacting with the digital properties that accompany the book. To the point where I think a lot of my students, at least, they always go, they ask me if just studying the PowerPoint slides is enough. And it's something that then becomes difficult for a publisher to make sure they get, let's say you have a course of 100 students to sell 100 books. When students start to realize that they can accomplish their learning objectives without actually having to buy the book. And so I think probably about 15 years ago or so, the publishing industry has started moving towards finding ways to move towards a subscription model instead of a purchase model. Just like a lot of software companies did, they moved towards an access code, limited term that you could have access to the digital resources, and every code was unique, and there was some way for your grades to be attached to that. And so in the last 15 years, the publishing industry has been using that as their revenue source in order to combat the simple fact that people don't read through those 2-inch thick books anymore. And so one of the things that has come from that is a massive data set. The publishers have a lot of assignments that were completed from a lot of students. Those courses. And then they could start investing in more technologies to make, these grading technologies. The way I had the opportunity to speak with, one of the senior editors a couple of years ago about that. And I explained to her that her job wasn't selling books. She was a senior editor for a major publisher. And, she was taken aback by that. And I said, no, it's not selling books. It's making professors' lives easier. And so she then kind of explored that topic a little while. And it was more about how do we add value for people teaching a certain subject? And one of the things you can do is connect all of the people who use that textbook with an online community, and they can then crowdsource how they use that book and what they use to supplement it.
I love that.
And that was a really wonderful experience being part of that community. And so people did things like share their videos. And so in your example of how do you get your best professors working and sharing things, well, that's what we did. We each individually just contributed. Here are some of the videos I use when I talk about project management or something. I use this video from whatever company, or we use this case and that sort of thing. And so all that supplementary material started to be crowdsourced by the teachers. And so that was a very successful pilot. So successful that she actually left the major publisher and started her own company.
Oh, wow.
So we're quite happy with that. And,
I love how you reframed it for her, saying you're actually in the business to help professors teach. And it's so cool that you help to kind of even inspire this community to help teachers share resources, case studies, things to help improve their learning environment for their students. I think that's wonderful. Do you see that continuing to evolve and grow?
Actually, there's a growing movement now called OER, the Open Educational Resources. And, I think, I'm not sure the exact origins, but I assume it started with, high school, elementary school teachers who typically had, even smaller budgets than universities, and they had to come up with ways to share resources. With some government grants, there were a couple of textbooks created, but then they were made open for anybody. So that has kind of ballooned into at the university level as well, where faculty members will sometimes write textbooks and make them available PDF for anybody to use. And then that goes beyond the books. That goes to, with the other educational assets. like videos or simulations and that sort of thing, learning exercises, cases, you name it. And they're being shared now amongst university libraries in this open educational resource space. And a lot of it is in response to the challenges students face funding their education. And quite often textbooks, they're not the only way to convey the knowledge. Or you don't need to have a super expensive one in order to teach a topic. And so I think there's a lot of momentum in that space. I think there'll be a lot more sharing and building around these resources. And it's like open source software where people can also build upon things. Mm-hmm. And so it's not one author sitting in their cottage somewhere, slaving away over the summer and then coming up with a manuscript, and that takes 2 years for a publisher to put into print. It being digital, it can be morphed and adapted, and you can combine and you can have mashups of different topics as well. That's where I see, the future of faculty and educators is going to be, they're going to be more co-creators of content rather than just, taking something off the shelf and delivering that as the way to teach something.
And I think really cool about those types of communities and crowdsourcing is that it not only are teachers coming together to share different, case studies and ways to teach something, but also even how they're using or will be using AI in the classroom. Before we go, can you share a little bit about how you see AI impacting education in the future?
I think probably one of the biggest impacts it'll have is going to be on the administration, where when you can kind of track where students are learning and kind of look at where their learning career is, and you can look at your entire student body with some predictive analytics and pinpoint where are the places that you need to improve the retention rates, or what are the decision points where a student decides to go into this major or that major. And so basically using machine learning on the operational data of education is, that's probably where there's going to be the most impact in the next couple of years. As far as in the classroom, we're already seeing, some of these auto grading tools, quiz tools, that sort of thing. One of the things I'm working on as well is to teach machine learning. We partnered with University at Montreal, HEC Montreal, and the SAS Institute to basically build a game to teach how data science works. And so it's called Cortex is the name of it. And so it's a different approach to teach data science, which was typically, very machine learning. It's very statistics heavy. The approach most institutions had was, you had to teach the fundamentals, you had to teach all the math before you start getting into cool projects. So the approach we took was, well, why not just let the students work on something, submit their answer in a competition, like a Kaggle competition, and then if they don't rank highly, they can try again. And they can tweak, and that's what a data scientist does. They keep refining the model. And so we built a gamified approach to that, and it's being used in a couple of universities now in a new way of introducing data science to business students without having to teach them all of the math before they're actually building predictive models. And that way they can see how different techniques compare. If you're going to just do a regression, or if you go all the way to a neural network, they start to learn what are the trade-offs between the time it takes to come up with a solution and how accurate it is. And then we also have concepts in there of overfitting as well, because they can quickly learn and see what the differences are when they're changing their model. And the amazing thing about a gamified approach to teaching is students will redo their homework if they didn't do well the first time.
Oh,
right?
that's very cool.
So they'll get competitive, and they'll want to try again, and they'll try again, and they'll keep trying until they get it. And really, that's what we're trying to accomplish when we're teaching. Is we want the students, everyone in the class, to get it,
Mm-hmm.
but some don't get it the first try around, and so that's where the gamified approach, where it's okay to fail, and try again. That's why we use that.
That's very cool. It's called Cortex.
Yeah, it's called Cortex, and it's available on the SAS site. I think they're making it available also for anybody who wants to learn machine learning, and based off of the Enterprise Miner, comes in the Amazon Cloud Enterprise Miner access as well with it.
That's awesome. That is so cool. Dr. Michael, thank you so much for being our guest and sharing your insights on how AI is being used in the classroom, and also what to expect in the future. For those that want to connect with you or to learn more or talk with you about the work you're doing, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Easiest is to find me on LinkedIn. There aren't that many Mike Bliemels out there, so you'll find me pretty easy on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. For those looking on LinkedIn, just look up Michael Bliemel. Last name is spelled Bliemel, and you'll find him there, and you can follow him there and connect with him. Dr. Bliemel, you're doing awesome work. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of the Data Talk podcast. My name is Mike Delgado, and we record this show every single week on Facebook Live. If you found this show helpful, please let us know by rating us on iTunes. And if you want to know about past episodes or upcoming ones, you can always go to the Experian blog. The URL is just experian.com/datatalk. Again, that's experian.com/datatalk. And that'll bring you over to the page where we have a listing of all of our show notes and past episodes. We recorded over 100 so far. And we're also looking for your recommendations. So if you ever have suggestions around topics or guests you'd like to hear from, please let us know. You can reach out to us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @ExperianDataLab, or you can just reach me directly @Mike Delgado. Thanks so much for your support, and thanks so much for subscribing to our shows.